Hello, Internet, and welcome to another Wednesday serial. This time, I just want to talk about Green Lantern, but this time, I'm talking about the first act of Kyle Rayner's run. Let's start going through this, and with the magic of editing, let's start showing off some covers. So, first off, we start off with 51. This is not technically the first appearance, but I mean, this is the first real bit of Kyle Rayner that we get. This is the issue that, I mean, even for an origin, I think gets over referenced, especially considering that it's not much of one. So if you don't know, Kyle Rayner is at a bar in a back alley of the bar, actually. And then Ganthet, the only named guardian we get, comes up, hands him the ring, and disappears. And he slips on the ring like, what? And the words he says is, I believe my life is going to change, or something much to that effect. And that's it. And it's just kind of like, okay, so we're Green Lantern now. Next issue, he's fighting Mogul, who's the guy who blew up Coast City, because Coast City blew up, Hal went crazy, killed all the lanterns, killed most of the Guardians, and is why Kyle's effectively the Green Lantern. So it's this big fight, it's a big deal, especially because he's yellow, but we find out that doesn't really matter. But it also doesn't really matter that it doesn't matter because Kyle is still figuring things out, while his girlfriend, Alex, who's a photographer, is trying to help him along. But Superman shows up, which is maybe a little more earned than you'll see with a lot of the other team-ups, because Mogul was attacking Ghost City in part due to Superman during the whole death and return of Superman bit. And so the fact that there's this weird hero trying to help out and fight Mogul at all is kind of strange, but knowing that it's a Green Lantern, Superman assumes a lot and says a bit about, like, the Corps and the Guardians, and Kyle has no idea what he's talking about, which is interesting, but something that kind of, I feel like the interest fades as we go on. So, boom, we get Deadly Force. Green Lantern 54 fighting off Major Force. Yeah, which, Major Force is the one who stuffs Alex in the refrigerator, which is where the term women in refrigerators comes from. Though, that was an article written by Gail Simone. That's a whole thing. I knew this was coming when I started reading this, and I was kind of prepared to let it go. Though reading it does feel kind of superfluous, and, like, I think it's good that this was examined, because Kyle Rayner was introduced an issue before Alex was effectively in, like, a couple panels. So really they've been around as long, and it is literally a few issues in. She's murdered after helping him kind of get on the path of trying to figure out what to do with the Green Lantern and be a hero, even though he was planning on essentially being a superhero. Just the idea is that he's a younger kid and in his 20s, as they say, and an artist. And so he's trying to figure out what to do and how to be responsible. And he has this big arc kind of with overcoming responsibility. The problem is it's not really an arc, because it gets waylaid and then cut off after he's actually made progress in the face of how he's supposed to be viewed in the Justice League. Because in order to keep him feeling young, they feel the need to make him also incredibly irresponsible, which is weird at the end of the run, but we'll get back to that. And I'll maybe get into a little more brief talk as we go on, because I am going from where we're at with 51. I've read through 125. So, woo. So then we get this really weird intersection with 0 Hour, which is kind of the start of the biggest problem through the majority of Ron Marz's run, introducing Kyle Rayner as the Green Lantern. The book keeps jumping off to deal with DC events or crossovers with the book. And clearly that's to try to bring people in, show that it's a new flavor. It's the hit new Green Lantern, I guess. But what it does for people who were trying to enjoy Green Lantern, like me now, is that you're reading the book, and every few issues it's another friggin' team up, so you can't follow the story ever because it keeps jumping to every other book in the DC but Green Lantern itself. So yeah. So 0 Hour is really the start of that, though it's a bit more earned, but it also isn't at the same time, because this is a major issue as far as the status quo of the DC universe. Because if you don't know, because I didn't, 0 Hour is about Hal Jordan kind of coming back and taking the mantle of Parallax, which is, I don't quite get what his power set's supposed to be. It seems very akin to a Green Lantern, but he keeps wanting the Green Lantern power. But he also seems to have the ability of time travel, and so what he's doing is winding back the clock, which has weird effects across DC, I know, which wasn't always related to Green Lantern, but he's trying to reset the clock so he can be Green Lantern and everything's here and everything's okay, but it's in a not okay way. So ultimately, Ollie has to shoot Hal, which is great because, sorry, here's the 0 issue. We get to find out about a lot of that in 56 and 57, when Kyle summarizes it while dealing with also being in a bar in space and other things. I don't know. What's funny too is about this space bar one is there's a bit of a wrap up, but this is one of the few solo issues that's more or less self-contained, where some girl he talks to just dies, which becomes an issue later because a lot of people around Kyle die, especially early on. 57's a big deal because we kind of get this intersection of the Dark Stars, which was a whole nother quarter of the DC universe I didn't realize. So what you need to know, because it plays in later, is that like the Guardians, there is this group called the Controllers that's related to the Guardians, but it's never fully explained, kind of like the ones who become the progenitors of the Star Sapphire Corps, but not the earlier Star Sapphire, just to be confusing. So the Controllers make their own group of superheroes called the Dark Stars that are their answer to the Green Lanterns. They don't have a... Their powers seem more set. They have like a power suit that enables strength, flight, and like power lasers. It's like the most boring set of superpowers that you can get, which is fine because you're going to have a bazillion of them, and having clear set powers is usually a better thing because it gives some backbone for the story. But it's like a cast-offs for Green Lanterns. So a number of Green Lanterns that were kind of disappeared from the Corps right before Kyle came on the book are Dark Stars. John Stewart's a Dark Star, and the bigger one is that Donna Troy is a Dark Star. And Donna Troy and Kyle quickly become involved, and that involves the Teen Titans as well, because Donna has her own mess to deal with that happens across the 3 books that I wasn't reading, but you get bits and pieces as you go along. Yeah, and so once we hit 58, we're kind of more in a status quo period, and you're just kind of dealing with the enemy of the week. 59 was interesting to see Kyle go against, an old Green Lantern villain, Polaris, but that's about the size of it. Then we get to 60, and here's where part of the problem happens. There was that Polaris, and now we're here. Capital Punishment, Act 3 of 3. You see that Kyle's about to kill Major Force. He still has a problem with Major Force. Basically, the story ends with him being like, heroes don't kill, da-da-da, but Guy says he's okay with killing, but whatever. Also, Guy's brother is involved, and Guy wants to take down his brother, which I'm sure is all set up, but that's all set up in 2 issues of the Guy Gardner book. And so we're left with a major fight for Kyle, and we're coming in with everything half-cocked and everything going on. We don't know what's going on. That's not just a crossover. That's rough. And then and then there's a bit with Darkseid's kids trying to kill Kyle, because I guess they wanted to elevate the idea of him being the Green Lantern being a big deal and taking on big characters. But I don't know. It didn't really sing for me. Yeah, so more of that. And then, oh my gosh, we get 2 issues that is like a thing, but it's held within Green Lantern. So this is Parallax View, and it's Kyle kind of realizing like who Hal was in a bigger sense, like getting to meet him, but also realizing that he's off his nugget now, which was kind of a big point for this book because it was kind of saying like Kyle's here to stay and this is going to be it. Like, really, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, Hal was the Green Lantern Silver Age on, and Alan Scott was around, and there was an issue here where Alan Scott was there, and Alan Scott has a whole thing going on where he's de-aged and yada yada yada, which I was talking about it in the last video. But here it's saying like Kyle's the Green Lantern. Here's why. And what's hard for a lot of people to swallow, and this happens through the letters page, all the way through 125 that I was reading. People just don't quite grasp onto Hal. And I have to admit, I've always thought Hal, or people aren't grasping onto Kyle. And I've always thought of Kyle as my favorite Green Lantern. Partially because, and they play with it a few points in here, that Kyle's more the Spider-Man-esque, you know, the everyman Green Lantern, which is cool and fun. But ultimately here, they don't really do anything with it. It doesn't really go anywhere. And so it's not much fun. So yeah, I don't know. I want to get through before we hit a cut. Right after that parallax bit where DC comes in, they recognize, you know, by DC I mean like Superman, Wonder Woman, them, and they recognize Kyle's the Green Lantern, give him some validity for what he's done. Yeah, and then we get a crossover with Supergirl where she reveals something to Kyle that she hasn't revealed to anyone, and woohoo! But we're in part 2 of 5, and then we're on to the next story with the Flash, which luckily is self-contained, and that sets up something between Wally and Kyle, when Wally being kind of the new Flash, but he's been around a bit longer, and the legacy I feel like carried more cleanly, so people were more okay with it. But I think the bigger reason, and it's kind of an interesting case study to compare them and a couple other of the transitions that happen around this point, is that Wally's stories were stronger, and there was more of the legacy carried through. Green Lantern, whereas there are some villains, aren't really as many strong villains. And the only time in this run that Kyle fights Sinestro is when Hal's there. So, like, he's the Green Lantern, but nothing about what the Green Lantern was at all comes with him. And that really starts to rock the boat. All right, so then we get couple issues intersecting with this DC thing called Underworld, where stuff happens and Donna has a problem and the Dark Stars fall apart around this time. And then in part because of that, they have a falling out when Kyle, who has moved into an apartment in New York at this point. He was on another coast. He's moved to New York. It's part of his new life, and him and Donna are hitting it off. Donna stops by his apartment with Jon Stewart. So this is the first time Jon Stewart and Kyle meet, is right when Donna and him have this effectively breakup. Because this tenant in the apartment building with him is a model, and so she's modeling nude on his couch and he's drawing because he doesn't want to do commercial work. He wants to draw nudes, I guess. And this causes a problem with them. Hooray. And then him and Jon Stewart have this long heart-to-heart about what it means to be a Green Lantern and a bit about the Dark Stars and whatnot. It's just kind of weird. And what's funny to me is 70 is an incredible standout issue from this run. This is far and away one of the best. And it's almost a shame to me that him and Donna get back together after this, because I kind of wanted the hard split to kind of teach him a lesson and move on to something without it being melodrama, but to have this idea of his irresponsibility having consequences, which would force him to grow up in a way that doesn't have to be death, you know. So from there, we move on to 71 Hero Quest. This is a big one because from here, he decides to just stroll around DC, teaming up with other characters, and trying to figure out what it means to be a hero, how he's going to be a hero, how he's going to kind of carry the Green Lantern legacy forward. This is another good chunk. This is probably around the time I think Marz was kind of hitting his peak and was free of some editorial cruft of, what they wanted. Was able to just write the book for a while. So then we get part 2 of Hero Quest. He's with Shazam, which I feel like is a stronger connection point for the characters, the idea of the youth to the responsibility of the hero, and actually would have been a better team up for Kyle than what he normally gets, but we only get this one issue with them. And then he goes to doing this thing with Wonder Woman, where we get this weird male gazy bit stuff with him that's very 90s comics. Is what it is. We get this big bit, who will die? Green Lantern and one of the Dark Stars. None of them die. That's who. But it ends up in this big Last Stand 75th issue where Kyle ends up fighting because of the Dark Stars and this big galactic threat, which kind of, it's a big moment for him as far as like getting down to the grits and doing kind of what he needs to do to be a hero. But it's weird that he has to do all this with the Dark Stars, who, as said, were part of the controllers bit, which ends up being a problem for him. Yeah. We get this team up with Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and then part 3, so we miss a part of it, but this is a big bit for Kyle. He meets his dad, which Kyle is a 90s kid, so he's a product of divorce. So, but we meet his dad, he's white, and we find out later his mom's white, which is I thought he was Hispanic, so that was weird to me that they're all white. And then, I don't know, we kill some time with some various issues, and then we get this bit with Final Night, where he fights Dr. Light, which feels like would be a great villain for any Green Lantern. I think that is a cool power set match and ideas of fighting that. But this ends with Dr. Light running away because there's an apocalypse and he doesn't know how to handle it. And then we get a big problem with the book again. This is Hal's funeral issue because he helped save the world in Final Night, heroic sacrifice and all that. And Kyle kind of has to like give the eulogy, but he doesn't really know Hal except as a villain. So it's weird. And then we get something to do more of the personal stuff where Kyle has to take out Donna's son to the zoo for a while. He doesn't have to take him to the zoo, but he does. Whatever. And has to save the kid from being eaten by a tiger because he lets the kid go for a bit. It's funny because they spend more time referencing this issue than really the meat of what happens in this issue. And so anytime when drama with Donna comes up later, I took that kid to the zoo once, gets brought up forever, and it's that one issue. Then we get a problem. Retribution is 3 parts, and what it is this character, Fatale, is the sole survivor of the planet that Jon Stewart blew up when he accidentally committed a genocide. Though, unlike other comic characters that committed genocide, he never meant to. It's an accident that happened. He's always felt regret from the moment it happened. So I actually feel like he's redeemable, unlike, Jean Grey or Bishop or something like that. A lot of X-Men. Anyway, this character is Jon Stewart's villain, and should be. And there's a lot of story there. But with Kyle fighting her, the big deal is that she manages to target him right when he's running out of power, so he has to fight her more mano-a-mano. And he gets some help from his friends. It really doesn't do much for Kyle except be, a hard fight. This is supposed to be setting up like a villain for him, but it isn't. It's Jon Stewart's villain. You can't escape it, so it's just a miss. Then we get Three's Company. Jade moves in with Kyle, but Obsidian, her brother, isn't happy about it. They're both Alan Scott's children, by the way, so it's just a big, weird thing. There's a Martian Manhunter team up that, I don't know. We get some dead time where we're just pushing stuff. And then we get a super special issue where Kyle meets up with his old friend who was in the bar with him the night that he got the ring. And this guy's just a drunk now. Went a little further in the artist career than Kyle did. But yeah, there's this whole big deal, and then he does the whole Elkie thing, gets in a car and drives off and crashes immediately. Like, dude, it's written like a bad 90s PSA. Yeah. Then we get Green Lantern Genesis. We get another Green Arrow team up, which really solidifies Connor and Kyle as kind of the super bros. And I think that's interesting, but I don't know. It's not so great. We get a cool close-up cover, and we're on to the next. And here's where we really enter the dead period of this run. We get something about Superboy. Who cares? Robot World. Three of a Kind, a team up that we only get the first part of. Graven. Future Shock. He goes in the future to fight with the evil Green Lanterns against the League, but you spend more time trying to figure it out. Basically, we're killing time for 100. Here's the arc that really something happens. Now, this goes on till issue 106, where Hal comes back. But Hal, the reason Hal comes back is because Kyle, when he went to the Legion, was thrown forward in time. Then he's thrown back, but like a decade earlier, they say, before he comes back to his time. But he comes back to his time with the Hal of 10 years ago, which Rubber Band Magic comic book time was Hal in his prime before he met a number of characters. He had just basically founded the Justice League. And now he's here. And he has to hear about what he did as Parallax and all this, and he kind of wigs out and tries to figure out what to do. This is also 100's the issue I was talking about where Sinestro comes in. And so Kyle's trying to help Hal through some of the stuff he's learned, but it's weird because here's where we really get the legacy of the Green Lantern and the Green Lantern Corps and the idea of the differences in the rings and everything that's kind of the lore carrying forward. We're 5 years in at this point. And this chunk of books was double shipped, so this sped up the time a little bit. But yeah, these are fun, great issues. You can't ignore the fact that this book picks up and is more interesting and keeps returning to Hal Jordan even when it's Kyle's book. And it's always stronger when Hal Jordan comes up. And I don't think it's just a difference between Hal and Kyle. I think the difference is Kyle on his own never really has been given the meat. He has a little side cast. He doesn't really have any villains. And he's trying to pick up the legacy of the Green Lantern Corps, but he's never really allowed to interact with any of them or play with any of that fun stuff and idea that would take a Green Lantern out into space and deal with fun concepts. And so here we get a fun time concept dealing with a character that we know and care about on top of Kyle, and seeing Kyle interact with kind of someone who he's meant to idolize, but he doesn't, and deals with it anyways. I don't know. It's a super great chunk of comics, and if you're going to pick up part of the run, I'd recommend this. And this whole run ends with young Hal fighting Parallax Hal right at the time of around 0 hour at his worst, when there's some time shenanigans going on. So they pull a bit of a Doctor Who and play with, well, if time travel's working, why not let it go in a way that works for the story, I guess. Yeah. Great stuff. And then we get into a little bit of more fun stuff where Kyle goes to go set up the Corps, which happens in 2 Prestige issues called the New Green Lantern Corps, which I didn't get. I haven't read. I don't know what that is. Nothing happens, though, basically. It's a failure. But while he's gone, he hands Jade, who's now his girlfriend, because Donna left. I missed this somewhere in the I Didn't Care issues, really. because it all happens off panel. Donna's family is killed in a car crash, so she goes sad and bombs out on him forever. And she just doesn't talk to him. So eventually Kyle gives up, starts dating Jade. They get along. He makes her a Green Lantern with like a cloned ring, because apparently the rings can clone themselves, which of all the powers that, it's not that it can be done, but that seems insanely powerful. Why don't they just hand these out like candy to people who they trust? It's a weird thing. Anyways, so we get Jade and Wonder Woman, which is actually fun, unlike Kyle and Wonder Woman. We get this Ghost of Christmas Past, which is talking about when Jade was sexually abused. Doesn't really get brought up again either, so it doesn't do much for the characters, so that's just uncomfortable. Then we get Connor and Jade, which is actually fun again. And then we get Fatale versus Jade, which is interesting because it plays with the idea of being the Green Lantern thing, and it's also when Kyle returns from space. So the whole Jade bit as Green Lantern actually was short-lived, but actually left a pretty substantial impact on me, and actually I think she's a great character fit in because she bridges the legacy between Alan Scott and this new stuff. So whereas I'm not as big on the familial connection, here it feels interesting and raw. And also, I mean, having a female character who's playing with the legacy of all this from a number of different ways just feels more interesting than most of the other Green Lanterns introduced by half. Whew. And then we get our last little run where I feel like Marz finally had some ideas and was getting them all out before he got kicked off the run. Though admittedly this is like a couple years worth of comics. So the first is Burning Effigy. Effigy is some young guy with no responsibility who's handed powers by the controllers. The Dark Stores have faded, and so now they're trying something else. They give this guy friggin' fire powers. Why not? And he's basically a jerk with them. So what he is a dark mirror of Kyle. And I thought that was going to be a bit rote, but when I was reading it, I was like, it is. But compared to where we've been through most of this run, it actually really did something. It gave Kyle a good villain to bounce against, and it gave some subtext to the B plot going on, and it was really great. Suddenly we have a good villain for Kyle in Effigy. We get this two-parter, and he does eventually come back, but yeah. Then we get to explore the irresponsibility a bit differently with Booster Gold and Plastic Man teaming up with Kyle. Yeah. They end up dealing with some weird criminal stuff, partially because Booster Gold irresponsibly sends something to Kyle that he wasn't necessarily meant to. It's this whole weird mix-up thing, but Plastic Man and Booster are kind of the screw-ups of the Justice League. And what's weird is a lot of people kind of view Kyle closer to them, but he knows that. He wants to ascend beyond that. So he's not screwing around. What's interesting, and I guess what's kind of the marked difference here, and it happened forever ago, but here we're kind of getting this delineation where Kyle's young, he's screwing up, he's making mistakes, but he's not just screwing around. He's trying to be a hero. He's doing his levels best. He's trying, he's learning, he's growing, but he's also just not Batman or Superman at the end of the day either. Like, he wants to be more friendly than Batman and all that. He wants to be more approachable, but also have more of a life than Superman and some of that. Like, it's interesting, and I think this is the mark where we finally get to see Kyle be a bit more. Here's a big one where, again, we get the haunting of the past. You see Hal there. It's not a big deal. What it is he's at the Warriors bar, which is Guy Gardner's bar, because he was the Warrior for a while, which it's its own thing. But Guy and Stewart hang out there a lot because it's like the Green Lantern Museum, equivalent to like the Flash's museum, but it's also a bar. Kyle's going to help Guy out, clean up, but there's a manhunter that's supposed to be deactivated there. It activates and blows up the bar, fights him. Yeah, okay. It shouldn't be a big deal, but it feels like a big deal at this point because it's such a brawl for no reason. And it's the only time the manhunters get brought up, which is just yet another, legacy coming through that that Kyle has to fight that isn't really his. Then we get, I'm glad Marz got here before he left. Uh, Donna comes back, and Kyle kind of wants to go with Donna, and then something weird happened with Donna about her being the way Waller remembers her or something. Something happened in Teen Titans. But then he loses Jade in the process, and Donna, so he's single. Womp womp. And then we get Hal Jordan coming back as the Spectre and trying to set something right with Carol Ferris, which is actually the second issue, because when he came back around 100, we get to see Carol and Pi again, and kind of Ferris Airlines where that is. And that's actually really fun to see, because these are cool characters that are better than most of Kyle's side cast. And yeah, I don't know. It plays off something there. 120 is playing off something of one of Kyle's sidecast. It's his landlord slash barista person who was some Secret Service agent in Europe, and they're dealing with the one case he couldn't deal with. It should be more interesting than it is, but it's also like the goodbye to that character that was just kind of there for Kyle to have someone to talk to instead of having an internal monologue. And then, holy crap, we have 4 issues that starts with Kyle and Jade. Like, Kyle wakes up, he's married to Jade, he's reignited the Green Lantern Corps and all this. And then Effigy is telling him that ain't it. And then you find out all that is a deception within a deception within another deception of him waking up to John, but John isn't crippled, so he figures it out. To realize the controllers are trying to figure out kind of what makes him tick, what's going on, and what's happening with the Green Lantern powers so that they can attack, quote unquote, the Guardians, but it's only Ganthet. And again, we get him having the leverage of this whole idea of the Green Lantern Corps and the legacy and the idea of that, even though he's the last Green Lantern at this point. But he doesn't interact or deal with it. He just has the baggage of it. And so it's weird to carry through. And now he's being targeted by the controllers, who he's helped their agents and their ends multiple times before at this point. And so, and frankly, he has no love for the Guardians either, which if they were watching their projections in his mind or whatever, they would realize, like, when Ganthet projects as he wouldn't had a tussle like he would have with Hal, Kyle's about ready to deck him one. So it just doesn't work again. Then we get a big Coda issue, 125, with Marz kind of signing off on this run, though he'll be back before it's over, to basically just say Kyle is Green Lantern, but he's rudderless. His romantic side's blown up 3 times now in major ways. Where he is as a Green Lantern is relatively unsure. Maybe he could try to restart the Corps, but that already failed. Maybe he wants to try again. Where he is as a hero is odd because he's in the Justice League, but he's not, like, really in the Justice League. It's just a weird way to say, like, I'm here, but I have room to grow. What a when I think of Coda issues, I always think of them now because I realized when I read them earlier that I thought of them as good standalone issues that kind of maybe took stock of the moment or something, not realizing that it was an author signing off until later. But I always thought of them as stronger, quieter issues that may not always be the most impactful or anything, but they always left an impression. This one leaves an impression, but what a groan, what a sigh. And so, I don't know, I've pushed through the better part of a decade here. And I am really ready to read the next run, but this has been a bit trying and a bit demoralizing. What's kind of helping me through is I know Winnick is around the corner. And I also know once I push through another kind of chunk, I'm on my way to reading the Jeff Johns Green Lantern, and then kind of on to the newer stuff, which I've heard so many exciting things about. I think it's interesting because I still think knowing where Kyle's going and kind of some of where Kyle's been, even, he's an interesting character. I like the character and kind of what he represents. And I remember the times of reading the Justice League around this era. He's fun. He's fun. But man, the book really suffered for a long time just trying to be the Kyle Rayner book. And I really get why people gravitate so much more to Hal Jordan in particular, but also other Green Lantern characters in particular, in a way that I feel like Wally has a stronger fan base. I feel like a lot of other secondary legacy characters have more love, and there's more division between who's people's favorites, so you can usually tell by the age range. But man, Kyle has really lost a lot of points, and that's interesting to go through and realize, when most of the reason I bought and was excited to read this run was for a lot of this. And now that I have, man, I'm really excited whenever I see Hal Jordan on those covers. So, yeah. Cheers.